So I'm Pete Leckie, live in Islay, and I'm the People Programme Manager at the NFCC. And I also head up the leadership programme as well. I'm going to talk a bit about kind of my mental health journey in terms of, in relation to International Men's Health Day and their sort of theme about make time for mates. I'll be talking about how my mental health journey is kind of informed some of the, is a big part of my life, and it's a big part of what I do. My interaction with fire and rescue services. So I'm a former whole-time firefighter as well. And before taking on this job, and how that was quite a transformative experience for me in terms of how I think about mental health and think about the mental health of others, and especially my colleagues and my friends. And also give a chance at the end for you guys to sort of ask questions of me about my experiences, my journey, and kind of work that we're potentially doing in the People Programme as well. So Emily is going to be assisting me Emily's going to be my foil. She's going to be probing me and asking me some questions as we go. But for you guys, if we can kind of keep you guys muted towards the back end, and then we can bring you in for some questions thereafter, okay? That'd be grand. So Emily, shall I start by just giving some more sort of bits of my background and what my maladies are?
Yeah, I can do. If you're comfortable with that. I had a few things written down, but it's up to you if you want to.
Well, what did you have written down?
Well, probably about what you're going to say. So I was just going to say that, so obviously you're People Programme Manager and you were previously Senior Project Manager. You've got a varied working background. You began your career in the construction and facilities industry, and then you moved to waste and environmental, and eventually fire. You trained as a whole-time firefighter 6 years ago. You moved to the stunning Isle of Islay. You've resided on the island ever since with your wife, Charlotte, and baby boy, Arthur, who's nearly 1. And Islay is the Whiskey Coast, although you assure us that's not why you moved there.
I can absolutely assure you it's not why I moved there, because although I'm actually sat around with quite a few bottles around me, it doesn't agree with me. I've got to this stage in my life where I need a heavy dose of omeprazole before drinking whiskey. But anyway, okay, well that's great to have that said. Well, I think so. My kind of mental health journey starts like everyone's at a point of, sometimes starts at a point of crisis, sometimes start at a kind of long burning sort of issue. But for me, where it all started when I was a kid. And so as an adult, I suffer from depression and anxiety and major depressive disorder. And I manage that through various techniques, and I'll come on to that. But kind of where it all sort of stems from, or in large part, was to do with my childhood. So that my dad was I come from a bit of an odd background. So my dad's a lot older than me. So if my dad was alive, he'd be in his 90s, be sort of 90, 93. And my dad sadly passed away when I was 14. But it was quite a traumatic moment, and I was quite intimately involved with his death, and he sadly died in my arms, which as a child was very traumatic. But up until that point, my dad had been dying for a long time. He basically suffered from heart disease and cardiovascular kind of disease. When my dad was my sort of primary kind of caregiver in lots of respects. My mum worked a job in a local authority at a very senior level, and she was the main breadwinner in the household, and I didn't really see very much of her, to be honest. But then we were in sort of an odd situation where she had to take on that role as well as being doing her working life as well. And there was a lot of tension, so things kind of simmered away sort of age 14. A lot of the kind of the pain of the death of my dad, I didn't really kind of acknowledge. I just sort of threw myself head first into school and into trying to do the best I could there. And I was involved in lots of things, and I was, head boy of the school and all of that by the time I came out. But then when I came out of school, with quite high expectations are built up around me by myself and by others, I found myself really sort of dislocated and a bit at a loss. And I went to Glasgow to did the thing that all kind of teenagers in small Highland towns do, is they go, right, where's the nearest city? I'm going to go there and discover myself and, do this, that, and the other, and set off with grand plans. And then when you get into the reality of being an adult alone in the world and having to work and provide for yourself and all the kind of stressors, there's a real sort of cumulative kind of effect on me and sort of my kind of feeling of dislocation. And what that resulted in was a fairly kind of significant episode of depression, which was timed around about the time of me going to university. I ended up dropping out of university. I was studying law at Strathclyde. It was a pretty messy sort of dropout, and was put on very strong medication, which didn't really agree with me, and then resulted in me, being sectioned under the Mental Health Act and having an evaluation carried out and a sort of a kind of plan put in place to aid my mental health, which was a mixture of talking therapy and medication. That did my mental health did improve, and I felt like I was able enough to go back to university. However, again, the same thing occurred, but to a much greater extent, ultimately resulting in a very difficult series of psychotic episodes, which are very upsetting at the time, but are interesting to me now to look at and kind of think about. And I've got very vivid memories of them and about what was going on at the time. But to sort of review kind of post fact and kind of cognitively, interesting sort of breakdown. But anyway, the long and short of it is that I received additional support, this time in the form of a very good course of cognitive behavioral therapy, which I felt better equipped me to kind of manage my own kind of mental health and well-being, and really sort of keep and certainly mitigate or reduce the amount, the impact of my depression and anxiety. And this is me kind of very, very quickly trying to run through this. There are lots of other things that kind of happened within this. A lot of experimentation with self-medication, so through drugs and alcohol. And I kind of, quip occasionally that I can't really remember ages 17 to 21 very well. And it's true. There are large blocks of time and things that kind of went on that because of a mixture of these elements that I've very limited awareness of. And it's whether that's a kind of conscious thing or not, or a subconscious thing, I don't know. But long and short of it, that's kind of where my mental health and well-being kind of got up to by sort of my early 20s. And then since then, and I'm now in my kind of mid to late 30s, depending on your perspective on the age of mid to late 30s. But anyway, I'm now kind of at that sort of end of my life, and I've been working on it ever since, and it's been an ongoing process. And there are days and weeks where there are good days and bad days. There are good hours and bad hours, and sometimes it can be minute by minute, and sometimes it's my mood and everything that goes with it is parabolic in trajectory. And what I really try and do, using the skills that I've been given, the support that I've been given, is try and keep things in balance and be be reflective. I mean, I also read quite a lot of Stoic philosophy, which, if anyone has never picked it up or read Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, I can't recommend it enough. It's not a typical self-help book, and it shouldn't be viewed as a self-help book, but it's his thoughts on what the true nature of reality as you perceive it as an individual sits very, very closely with a lot of the training and techniques within CBT. And I found it very illuminating. I also have an interest in history, so I feel like my brain can engage with it a lot better. And to be honest, a large part from my experience about when I've been able to engage with things well, it's because I've either had an interest in it or I can see a route through it in some kind of respect. So that there's all of that. Anyway, so that's kind of my mental health journey up to now. I don't know, Emily, do you want to sort of come in on any of that, or sort of probe me? And
I was going to say, Pete, you mentioned that even now you have good hours and bad hours.
yeah,
How do you cope with the bad hours?
so I think, yeah, the bad hours, it's all to do with things that are triggering, or that can kind of kick me off, and being able to break it down in terms of what is real and what is not real, like what is supposed as opposed to what is kind of just exists in my head, and sort of being able to step away or step back and see things, and that's what that CBT does. So for example, if I have a particularly challenging incident, that I have to deal with, say someone's been really rude to me, which I actually have to say, in doesn't happen on a very regular basis in our sector, but it does happen. But if someone is rude to me, or challenges me in a sort of personal level, then I can react. It can set me off for the whole day, and I'll be thinking about it, and then it become this thing that I'll go back to, and it's almost like it's like picking a scab. I'm compelled to do it in some sort of respect, and the way that I sort of go through those sort of those bad hours, if you like, is by arresting it, by saying, well, even sometimes it helps by writing it out, like by drawing it out and saying, well, this is what happened, this is what was said, and really trying to sort of retain a bit of objectivity. And that doesn't always work, but it can and has helped. I think that's where the make time for mates kind of idea is really, really important. Is that I've been really lucky that I've had really great support from the National Health Service and from trained professionals, and that is a huge value. But in these dark moments, these dark hours, that can sit alongside lots of other dark moments, dark hours, and become like a really, really big, kind of abyss that you can easily sort of find yourself in. It's being able to having someone challenge you on it, and it is a challenge. Even ask, and let me be clear that if I'm in really, have been really, really bad in terms of my depression, and someone has said, oh, can we talk about why you're depressed? Can we talk about what the reasons are behind this? Can we talk about what's triggered you into this? How did you feel about this? When you're in that is a challenge. Like it feels almost like it can be really, really hard, and really, really hit you and take you in a different direction. But it is important to be able to do that. And I think actually, thinking about my, being a firefighter, and I think one thing that's really is that you are a part of our culture, is that you're all in it together on the incident grounds and in the station, and you're in such close proximity that you can see people and you're able to observe people's behaviors. And what I've found is that people were challenging me on what was going on, and noticing, oh, Pete's been really quiet for the last like 2 days. Why is Pete really quiet? Why is Pete, doing this, that, or why is Pete not looking at anybody in the eye? Why is he sort of doing, seeming almost robotic in his actions? Like what's all that about? And then that making that approach, and that approach quite often was done one-to-one, and just quietly, and just sort of trying to kind of get an opening up to allow for a bit of dialogue on something, to then address an issue or a challenge. And in the same way that I've done that before, but I think about like how I've been challenged by my friends, and when I've been particular, or how I've been supported by them, reaching out with a phone call to check in, and not instantly leap into, and how are you, and what have you been doing, almost like a list of like sort of like a checkbox list, and sort of saying, so did you watch that thing about the history program that you really enjoy? What did you think about that? What do you think about getting a sort of an in that isn't about that, that can draw some focus and kind of just clear the air a wee bit before then going into that conversation? So I've had it recently where I've had a friend has had a series of circumstances have happened that have really, really challenged his mental health and put him into crisis. If I kind of, a lot of those things that have happened are things where, like, say he has moved out of it, he's fallen out with somebody and he's had to move out of a flat. He's got a difficulty at work around his new flat and its proximity to his new, where he's going to live. He's got a challenge in terms of rent coming up and everything else. It's very easy to kind of just go into the mode of, right, let's deal with these problems, bump, 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 bump. This is what, I think you need to do, rather than kind of, taking it much more, or, what's happening, what's happening more generally in your life first, and then kind of breaking it down bit by bit, and then seeing what they can do to help, not just this is what I think you need to do. And I think a lot of when all this kind of kicked off, or my mental health problems really kicked off when I was sort of 17 in Glasgow, the response that I had from some people was very much like, well, you're just doing this wrong. You're just doing this wrong, and you're just doing this wrong, and you're just doing this wrong. And this is what you need to do. And what it does is that it draws your self-esteem is already so low that to sort of have that kind of further and really, really direct sort of, it's not a challenge, it's more of an assault on it. It feels like at the time can really sort of push you. So it's all about providing, asking the right questions, having the right support, and going about it in the right way is the best way that I can kind of surmise it. And I just think about the instances where I've behaved, where I think about instances where my behavior has been like really bad and unacceptable as a result of my illness. So where I have been really rude to people, or really cutting and just, dismissive and not very pleasant. I think it's when those behaviors are there, regardless, you do need to be called out, and there needs to be, that is unacceptable. This is, not what's expected. And like by my friends, friends and people, and certainly, by colleagues as well. So yeah, I mean, I think that, in terms of the making time for people, and isn't just about, all right, I need to message this person. It's you understanding that when you message them, you're starting a dialogue, and you've got to be invested in that dialogue. And that person who's in pain needs to know that you're invested in that dialogue. And it's really important that you do that. I think some unhelpful interactions have been like, oh, how are you doing? How are you, or like somebody approaching it, but then not fully committing, or not wanting to are basically becoming uncomfortable. And sometimes people are uncomfortable and do find it challenging and do need to kind of step back from it, for even to safeguard themselves, and that is totally legitimate. But it's just being aware that when you put yourself forward for that, as that support, that there are expectations that come along with it, and when those expectations aren't met, that can further exacerbate sort of challenges and problems.
We've had a question in the chat, and it says, how and when do you know when to ask for help?
That's a really valid question. I think how and when I ask for help is, or when I'm, I go and ask for help, it's a lot sooner now than what it was in the past. So I didn't ask for help for 5 years until it got so bad that I was a danger to myself and others. It got to that point and then that was when I asked for help. And to be honest, that asked for help was, which was a section a section intervention, was traumatic in itself. I think that being able to discuss, asking when you're feeling like, or when I'm feeling like I have an issue or something that is challenging me today, that is pushing me into that sort of space, I start by breaking it down, and then if I, through my kind of self-reflection, sometimes it can feel almost like I'm like I'm talking without any commas, like I'm sort of running a bit breathlessly. And if I know that I'm doing that, I now know that that's an indication that it's beyond my control to alone to sort of address objectively. I've kind of lost. I'm losing that objectivity battle, and I need to have a bit of input from externally. So at that point, I maybe take it to a friend, take it, within my kind of support network, within with my wife perhaps, or another person, depending on what the issue might be. I mean, finding an example here. So on Isla, it's a really close knit community, 3,500 people. I'm an incomer, and I will always be an incomer. It doesn't matter if I live here for the next 60 years, I'll be an incomer. And that's fine. But it can be quite isolating. And it's a small west coast of Scotland island community with certain cultural elements that are challenging, or that I find challenging to deal with. I love it, and I'm absolutely 100% in love with the place. But these sort of challenging elements mean that I have a degree of anxiety about sharing certain things with certain people because of how I'd be perceived within the community, and how these perceptions can be lasting and they can have impacts upon it. Now, I'm very open about, I wouldn't be doing this today if I wasn't, but I'm very open about my mental health, and I'm very open about a lot of my views and whatever else, and that's fine. But I think I've got a very select few people that I would maybe share some of these kind of ask for help with. But all of those people that I would go to for that help, I think, understand how to relate back to me, and that has come through getting to know me, and so and that stands for my best friend as well. But I think knowing how to ask for help and is also equally important, and that ask, when you're in the thick of it, and when you're literally, in my case, when you're having conversations with your own personification of death, which was kind of as hard as it got, when you're sort of doing that, you're asking for help by your behavior in a lot of respects, and that's where the state steps in, and that's where others can step in and really, really help you and challenge and whatever else. But it's the stages before that where you're struggling and things are mounting up and it's snowballing. It's knowing how at that point to ask for help, and being able to identify that things aren't right. And it can be a particularly hard challenge if you've been unwell for a long time. If you've been not great for a long time, what is healthy? How do you identify healthy? Healthy can feel, it can feel just as alien at times. So the other thing to flip it around is, when do you know to give help? When do you know to check in on somebody? How do when is it appropriate to do that? And I can only, I'm speaking from my experience, but I feel that it's appropriate to check in with your friends and your colleagues and people you interact with when you feel that something isn't right. And that can be something very, very slight, and it can be something really, really big. But it's how you then check in, and how you then make time for that person, how you then support them whilst looking after yourself as well within that relationship, it is a big challenge. But actually being able to make that approach sort of confidently is also challenging in itself.
Another question in the chat, Pete. It says, so this person's quite new to the fire and rescue service sector. What if people don't want to have conversations with peers or managers? What other health and wellbeing resources and support that we can signpost to when people might need it?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, there is, Mind. A very, very would be my first port of call in that respect. I mean, I myself used. So I myself have used Mind, but I've also used, in Scotland, you can use Breathing Space. Very, very good. And they allow you to get things off your chest. I mean, also, I'm aware of the excellent work the Firefighters Charity does there, which is open to everyone in the sector. I think that the work that we are the tools that we have today won't be the tools that we have in the future. There'll be more, greater, and enhanced sort of tools, and we're in a constant development journey to improve that. We've just done a really big exercise in health and wellbeing research partnered up with NTU and the Firefighters Charity that is going to produce a strategy, and then we'll go on and develop a framework that will include support elements around mental health and well-being. I think the other thing just to mention as well is that there is the Samaritans, and I myself have used the Samaritans, which is in a particularly dark and dreadful period. But what was great and what was amazing was that I never felt rushed. I never felt by any of these, and by Mind as well, I never felt like what was happening to me was silly. I never felt daft about it. I felt like people were listening, and what I got back was a real feeling of having of being secure in my human value, because a lot of what kind of this this condition does is that it says that your value to yourself and to others is degraded, or is lessened greatly, and any opportunity for you to kick that and to reduce it, you'll take it, because it's not because it's easy, it's but because you're not well, and that's you're kind of, it's almost like you've got one of these conditions where your body is attacking itself. Is a bit like that, and it becomes kind of a cycle. But by having that kind of sort of that support there, it lets you, it increases the resolution. I'm trying to sort of do it in sort of visual terminology, and I'm gesticulating wildly, and I apologize for that. It's but it allows you to increase the resolution and see things a bit more clearly, in terms of, or it made me feel a bit more alive, valued, and human, which that is, if you can do that with somebody who is not well, who is under pressure, and reinforce their importance in terms of their humanity and everything that goes within it, that's a really, really powerful statement. And really, and that starts by asking, by asking the right questions, by, are you all right? Probing, just spending time with somebody and doing some, actually spending time with somebody doing something that is maybe new to you both, or is maybe a distraction, and providing a bit of, gives them a bit of space. That's one of the things that actually helped me. So I was not very good at, I wasn't very good at cycling. I'm dyspraxic, so I've got rubbish. Sorry, I'm dyspraxic and I have rubbish motor skills. Not I am dyspraxic, therefore I have rubbish motor skills. I am dyspraxic and I have rubbish motor skills. So, but I took up cycling and I went cycling just with a friend, and cycling became a sort of meditative experience in lots of respects, but to kind of more talk over these things, and that actually the engagement with nature and the being outdoors along with the physical exercise, but the actual activity of doing something that was like that did provide a real window to kind of view things from, and a safe space for me to kind of get my thoughts in order and get things articulated. Going just back to the point around when to know to ask if somebody needs help, I talk occasionally about semiotics, which I don't know if anyway, semiotics is a science of communication, and it's used a lot in theatre and in acting, and it's about like how different things connote meaning, so how things show their meaning. And a lot of our human behaviors and our behaviors with the people that we're closest with, body language, voice, what people's eyes are doing, all of these things at that kind of in that sort of person level, that semiotic, that sort of semiotic level, are your flags about this person's experiencing some degree of distress, and you then sort of act accordingly. And that you firefighters will see that at an incident, and we'll see that at an incident ground, and they'll see it post incident, and they'll see it on the training ground with the recruits. They'll see it in lots of different respects, those sort of triggers. But when people are out of a work context, those triggers can be slightly masked by other things going on. So it's just, I'd say, kind of getting an awareness of that, and you do that through familiarity with somebody. Even if you're not familiar with someone, if they're displaying a pretty obvious kind of tell, then that's the point at which to leap in.
I was going to say, do you find it easier to recognise in yourself now when you are getting those low hours?
Yeah, I do. And I do find it easier up until the point that I don't. Up until the point where I'm suddenly like, oh, so there's that. And it's like it is like somebody's got you by the shoulders, and then you're back in it. But luckily that hasn't happened for a long time to any kind of great degree, and hopefully it won't. I fully expect that it will, and it's something that I have to live with and that I manage. But yeah, I think that my ability to, or my emotional intelligence has gone up greatly, and that was greatly upskilling my emotional intelligence and sort of training me in my understanding of that has given me a better toolkit to work on it and understand it and evaluate it than otherwise. So yeah, in answer to that.
Thanks, Pete. We've got no more questions in the chat. I don't know if anybody wants to ask any directly. There's one from Sean, Pete.
Cool.
Afternoon, everybody. Pete, thanks for that. Really sort of powerful to listen to. Thanks for taking your time to share that with us. I've not really got a question for you. It's just something that resonated with what you said. I had a friend in the service who was really struggling with mental health. He came back to work too early and unsupported. We didn't really know what to do. And one thing that he said to me is that I used to text him from time to time, not ask him how he was, just say what he'd been up to. Had he been training or doing anything like that? And some days he would never respond, but I'd never stop. I'd always just keep dropping him a text. When he got better, it was amazing how little things like that was really, really supportive. And it felt it just allowed him to maintain a safe level of contact with people from outside, but he said he was nowhere ready to speak to anybody, let alone on the telephone, and couldn't even imagine it face to face. So it was just little things like that when you said it, it just sort of jogged a memory to me that sometimes don't realise how little things can sort of help. That was all.
No, it's a really, really valid point, Sean. And it's, yeah, I mean, I think that I've benefited from exactly that in the past. So, you know, people just dropping these little messages and just keeping, and interestingly, just people telling me what they've been up to always felt really good, because then suddenly it made me it drew me out of what was just my kind of struggle and what I'm kind of battling with. And then I'm thinking about, all right, so Daniel's making cream cakes at the weekend with his sister, and they're going to take that and sell them at the fair. And then suddenly I'm thinking about that, and it just gives, my brain will still go back to the unpleasantness and still go back there, but it'll give me a couple of minutes. And in those couple of minutes, sometimes, you know, it can lead on to, you know, better, you know, more balancing thoughts that are there. But yeah, it is important. And I feel like, you know, with certainly now, you know, the approach that I kind of adopt is that, yeah, I do sort of send me messages to people, and just, you know, even just daft things, quite often send them podcast recommendations. I think had my last major depressive episode happened recently, I probably would have spent a large amount of time listening to podcasts, and as a way of re-engaging in the world. But anyway, that's by the by. Catherine. Oh, sorry, Catherine, just showing me.
Mute, yes. It always happens to me, the mute button. So yes, fascinating and a beautiful talk that you've just given. I'm a nurse practitioner with the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service based in Inverness. So I haven't been to Islay, but it is on my cards at some point. I'm an island girl myself, but off the west coast of Ireland, and sadly, a lot less of population, 180 as opposed to 3,500. So I know exactly where you're coming from about the cultural influences and how that can make one feel connected or not connected. But I have as a nurse practitioner with the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, I have great interest in mental health, and obviously a lot of people that I employees I see to on a day-to-day basis, are in that vein, you know. So there's a few questions. I love the idea of comments as opposed to, you know, and one of them for me is about labeling. And I feel obviously labels are really important in the beginning. You know, if somebody has a mental health condition, I think they really are important to through self-reflection and to the proper care, and that people, if they have a diagnosis, they know how to manage that sufficiently within the workplace and out with the workplace. But I just wonder what your thoughts are on whether at some point, you know, that it's important to drop the labels as well, because a lot of labeling, you know, can become victimhood, and see that as a negative. Labeling can become negative in that sense. And I'm speaking more about probably maybe just low grade stress, low grade anxiety, mild mental health, you know, which we see a lot of, but also as to how we build our resilience as humans. You know, we live in a very complex world at the moment, and how we can build that resilience as humanity, a common humanity, as well as, you know, be fully connected with our own humanity. And I think that's a big challenge. And you've mentioned one of the things there about emotional intelligence, and I love that idea, because to me, that's what it's all about. It's being more emotionally intelligent, and I think as humans we've resisted that. I think we, you know, I see it in myself sometimes. You know, we resist because we think it's a weakness to express how we feel or how to fulfill that humanity. And that is a challenging, and it's always a challenging. So I love the idea of this spaciousness when you're dealing with people, not trying to tell them what to do or find a solution to their challenge, but having just the space to connect and to be another human, listening to another human being that has a challenge or a stressor or whatever you might want to call it. And I feel that is critical in so that we allow that expression of who we are to come through, and because otherwise you're in denial, you're denying who you are, in some way or other. I feel that's really, as a health practitioner, that we really need to give people the spaciousness to express regardless of how difficult that might be, but also being able to hold that our own challenges while we're doing that. But I don't know whether you have any just thoughts on just resilience in general, and how we allow people to build that within such an organization as ours, because it is a stressful organization and can be, and it's full of challenges on and as a emergency critical service. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. No, that's really, really helpful and really insightful commentary. Thank you. I think how we build resilience, and how I built my resilience, is through developing that, is through self-reflection, meditative exercise, and good strong peer support, and placing with it, and that self-reflection, it being guided by principles, not just me picking apart myself. It's almost like I have a framework that I operate within. Being a good firefighter, I've got a framework that I can refer to. It's almost like a manual that I can turn, flick through in my head and go, I do this to do that, because that's how my brain works, and not everyone's brain can do that. So there are kind of challenges within it, but I think how we address resilience as a sector is probably going to be one of our biggest challenges in this area, and providing, looking at the toolkits and the support measures for that at a kind of at service level, at a sector level, at service level, at station level, at a watch level, at an individual level, is hugely important. I think there is a conversation that is kind of ongoing around sort of establishing how resilient firefighters feel they are, and how resilient colleagues across the fire and rescue services feel they are. And there are interestingly differing kind of views within that, and we need to get an understanding of that data. And I think the health and wellbeing report that's going to be published will be a really foundational evidence base that we can use to sort of build some of these things off of. But going onto your point around labelling, I think that labelling, you're right, can be helpful in terms of identifying and say that there is an issue, and there's an issue that requires treatment. I mean, my issue required pretty extreme intervention to safeguard me, and so therefore a diagnosis and a kind of treatment plan that has a name attached to it is quite useful. But I think how owning our humanity, not owning the label, if you see what I mean, or kind of being aware that the totality of our experience in terms of our mental health is not just one element. Stress, anxiety are one element. Like, we all face stress, we all face anxiety, but how we then deal with it, and that needs to be folded into that development and process around that personal resilience work. I'm just looking at the chat there. I just want to come in on James's point around, so he said, do you think there's too much focus on trauma experienced in the fire service as a challenge to our mental health, consequently taking away focus from many other challenges, expectations and pressures involved in being a firefighter, working on shift on-call system, or both? I think certainly the work that we've kind of just undertaken in the health and wellbeing survey and report is that we've mapped out the stressors that exist in a firefighter's life, and we've kind of mapped them in terms of your personal lives, but also the the operational kind of life and how they interact with one another, and understanding that the relationship that also that firefighters are human, that we are people, we are people existing in a world with all of the elements of our humanity, and that includes how tired we are. That includes, you know, how well we've eaten. That includes all of these elements, and how they all interact with one another produces a kind of a total picture of somebody's present mental health condition or likely mental health condition given a set of circumstances. And I think there's a lot of, we have an evidence base now, and we're going to be developing a strategy, but there's going to be further work, you know, in that arena at an academic level. And I think the NFCC are certainly, and the Firefighters Charity as our partner, is definitely geared up and excited to be part of that. I think Richard Potter, you put, thank you so much for sharing, Peter. You're very welcome, very happy to. What advice would you give your younger self? I think I've reflected on this a lot, and I've reflected on it a lot because I've got a wee boy who's about to turn 1, and I'll be giving him a lot of unsolicited advice throughout his life. And so, yes, what advice would I give to my younger self is to understand that low feelings of low mood and feelings of depression and is not a reflection on my capability or on my worth as a person, and just understanding that my worth is not defined by that. My worth is defined by a whole lot more, and that's the thing. And I think that is, to be honest, as someone who mitigates risk for a living, I spend a lot of time thinking about how I'm going to mitigate the risk of harm to my son, and one of the things that I'll be sort of working on with him is around understanding his worth. Sorry, Rob.
Hi, Peter. Thanks for your candid openness, and really enjoyed listening to you. I guess the question I've got is, how do we guard against the desensitisation of mental health? And what I mean by that, it can't become the version of the 1970s bad back. And I think because it's mentioned in everything at the moment, which is great in one sense, there's also a negative to that as well. And I am seeing it, throughout everything, mental health being mentioned in every interaction. And I don't want to see having that desensitization, if you know what I mean. It's probably the wrong set of words. But I think services need to guard against that, because, already, and I've challenged people that somebody's raised something around mental health and you've seen eyes rolling within the room. So I think we need to have strategies in place to guard against that. And have you got any advice around that?
Well, I think it comes back to that conversation about resilience and about emotional literacy. I think we need to do some upskilling on that and on mental health, and it not being a kind of remote thing that people don't have some degree of expertise in, that we all should have a kind of base level, or certainly with areas, bits in the service, that we should have a base level understanding of kind of mental health challenges and issues and awareness, particularly as we are adopting, we serve, or the sector serves a population of which there are people with mental health problems and challenges. You'll need to look at like the person-centered framework or other pieces of work to kind of sort of do that, where it puts the person at the center of the work. But I think by having that education and that understanding, and simultaneously developing and working on, resilience and supporting of resilience, we should be in a better position, so that we're not in a position where it becomes, as you say, that 1970s, the bad back. It's something that mental health is something that we all live with, and that we all have to, and that we all work to support and maintain each other in. But it's not something that, that's just the way that we need it to be, rather than it being a kind of a tick box exercise or a refrain that is used for kind of other purposes. Rob, if that answers.
Yeah, that's spot on. I think, we just need that wider understanding at all levels throughout the organisation, you know, and that layered approach to that understanding is really important, what we're trying to get in place within Staffordshire, because I think everybody's got a part to play, and it's that understanding that we're trying to get to the bottom of, you know, and understanding when to refer on to specialist support. And I think that'll improve the picture across the sector in the longer term. Thanks.
So as we're wrapping up, just thank you very much for your time today. And if anyone wants to get in touch with me, you know, my email address is peter.leckie@nationalfirechiefs.org. You can write to me, and I'm available to discuss any of the topics that we've talked about today. I think the why I do my job and what gets me out of bed, what gets me out of bed in the morning generally is my son needing a feed and his bum wiped. But what gets me turning on the computer and sitting at the desk and, you know, doing everything I'm doing is because I believe very strongly, I'm very committed to improving our sector and its service, but also for the people within it. And because I was one of those people, I'm one of those people. And it's really, really important to not just my ego, but my id, like my identity, to sort of be involved in this journey. And the thing that excites me most about this is, you know, this has been a really well attended discussion. It's been really, really, it's been really great to have this. We've got a lot of work that's coming up. We've had really great engagement from the sector and a lot of our health and wellbeing work. And I think that, you know, we're going to work really closely together on it. If anyone's been affected by any of the elements that I've spoken about today, then there are, I can see in the chat, there are organisations that people can contact and speak to if they don't want to speak to anybody within their service. But equally, should anyone require any support, you know, a friendly ear, I'm here as well. So I just wish you all the best.
Thanks,
all right.
everyone.
Thanks, Pete.
Take care.
Okay. Cheers. Bye.
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 Bye.